Hey guys, it's Ornlu again. Going to be talking about some of the more salient points, shall we say, that featured regarding the overall structure of the now just concluded, the day of me recording this, Red Bull Wololo tournament. So this will contain spoilers from that tournament, so you have been warned. So unfortunately, unlike the last sort of tournament discussion thing I did, I don't have any fancy spreadsheets for you guys with stats and whatever. So you get this very boring, if not informative, list of things I want to go through. So just getting right into it. In terms of viewership, the tournament was a big success, I would say. I think 56K was the big break point record across all the different platforms. Dash obviously very, very excited about that. And I think that should be happy for Red Bull, and it should be really good going forward. A lot of people tuned in. There was a huge amount of viewership on the Spanish streams, which was also really good to see. And I would say that the overall production quality was very, very good. Just because there are a bunch of things I want to talk about, and I don't really have the time to go into all of these things in depth. I think the Civ drafting plus one ban worked out really well. I think that the casting live was with minimal delays, and that was all very, very smooth and well done. Yeah, there were a few tech issues here and there, but overall the overlay looked good. Obviously, all the casters and Zach did a great job hosting. And overall, like the show was really good, and that is, I now know from experience, having done 3 lands now, that is not an easy feat. That said, there was a fair amount of controversy with some of the aspects of this tournament, so I'll just get into that now. Seeding system. So in case you don't know, or didn't know, the seeding system for this tournament was you had 8 players who were invited. These were the top 8 players from Hidden Cup 3, a tournament which, due to its nature, didn't have any seeding. So you already have kind of a problem there. That said, most of the invited players advanced anyway. 7 out of 8 did, so whatever. And then you had the other 8 players who were going through the qualifiers. And I cast most of the qualifiers, and there were some tough qualifiers that these guys had to go through. Like, there were some very, very competitive games. But that sort of brings us to the whole point where you have all of the seeded, or all of the invited players going up against all of the qualified players, which, like, does feel kind of unfair, because theoretically you're giving, like, really, really, really good matchups for all of the invited players. And indeed, the invited players won, like I said, 7 out of the 8 times. And I guess, like, just bringing this in with single elimination, I would probably feel more okay with it if it wasn't single elimination and it was, like, double elimination or, like, GSL-style groups, which is essentially 4-player mini double elimination brackets. Like, you just have a bunch of groups of those. We've had 2 tournaments now that have had single elimination, right from the get-go, as my dear Turkmen would say. And I hope it's something we can stray away from in the future. Maybe you don't even need to cast all of the lower bracket matches. I know it can take a lot of time, especially with, like, 16 people, but sometimes people get, like, a really rough match. You get seeded in round 1 against, the Viper if you're Fire. Then you're just feeling real bad, like you just didn't have a chance in the tournament. And that is, I think, a little unfortunate. And I think it speaks to the community's overall need for a more consistent, boring, standard, competitive league format tournament, which is something I harp on about a lot. I think that would be really, really good for the community, essentially a replacement for ECL of some kind, just because, like, all of these tournaments are, like, their own little events, and they all have their own little quirks and gimmicks, and it doesn't, like, saying that this is like the pinnacle of Age of Empires competition, like in determining who is the very, very best player, as far as what skills in the game we as a community determine are most important. Like, there isn't any consistency there. And it would be great if we had some sort of baseline. With that said, we don't. So everybody's kind of making do with what we got. It's just, I think, going forward, as I will get to later, it's something I think the community is in sore need of. Anyway, Empire Wars. Oh boy. Now this is, in case you don't know or need a reminder, you start with 27 villagers in the feudal age, all working away happily for you. You start with 2 horses instead of 2 scouts, and a barracks and a blacksmith. And this is essentially done to jumpstart the game, sort of get you right into the action right away, and, skip the Dark Age, essentially. Now, I wouldn't say that Empire Wars was a bad format. In fact, I think that it proved that it does have its place, I think, as sort of it's a competitively legitimate setting. I would say it's kind of like Deathmatch, where it's like, I think people, like, overall like Empire Wars and think that it has a place in the community for tournaments, but don't want it replacing the standard Age of Empires that we all know and hopefully love, that we've had for 20 plus years now. I'm definitely with that group of people. To me, Empire Wars, it feels like you don't get the build up. Now, you could say that Dark Age is boring, and I could sort of understand that. But to me, Dark Age, it sort of sets the tone of the game. You need that exposition, you need that intro stuff, in any story, whether that be like a book, a movie, or in this case, an Age of Empires game. You need to start low, so that way you can sort of climb up in action and excitement. Your empire starts with nothing. Well, 3 villagers and a scout, mostly. And I think that there's a lot of good in that you have very humble beginnings, and sort of all of the control of where you take your empire and what strategies you want to execute are yours to make. It's not like done for you. That said, it can be slow, especially on some maps. But like, as a caster, I usually don't feel like I'm just sleeping through the Dark Age in a game unless it's on like Arena or something. Usually, and I think all the casters do this, we use Dark Age to talk about the players, the map, the matchup, the civs, the overall storylines in any given tournament. And I think that almost always, like 95% of the time, is enough, not just interesting content, but important content for players to understand about like the context of the game that they're watching. That I think it is an important part of like Age of Empires as a whole, and I still think we should stick with normal conquest format. But again, this was a fun little break from that, kind of like Deathmatch. And kind of like Deathmatch, where it's like, it starts out with, post-imp, all the text research, so it's like there's a ton of action right from the beginning of the game, but then it just kind of falls off, and then like Deathmatch games are exciting and interesting for like the first 10 to 20 minutes, but definitely after the 20-minute mark, Deathmatch games are just like, okay, this game isn't going anywhere, you're just kind of smashing armies into each other. Now, it isn't that sort of flat of like build up with Empire Wars. It's just like you start from the rising action, as I learned in high school, as opposed to the exposition. And it's like you're starting a book on chapter 5, where it's like, yeah, you can still do that, and you still would get the most experience, like mostly the same experience, but it's not the full experience. And I've already been rambling on Empire Wars too much. Overall, it was good. The format itself is good and interesting, but wouldn't want that replacing a normal AoE. Time limit. This is something I am not a fan of. It's something I understand from a production standpoint, but I think that it proved to be bad. So the reason that they would, well, I guess I should explain, there was a time limit in each and every game of that by the 58-minute and 13-second mark or something like that. I think it was like 600, 700 years in game. But by an arbitrary amount of time that was around an hour, whoever had the highest score would be the winner, if the winner had not already been decided. And this was done to, one, prevent stalemates, which would be boring for viewers, especially new viewers, and two, it helps keep the show on schedule. And that latter point, I think, is a very legitimate one. Age of Empires tournaments have struggled a lot when it comes to keeping a good schedule. Now, having players who are late or take a long time between games or like slow to do drafts or whatever, like that's that's its own thing. That's not a game thing. What I think is sort of an unavoidable, just fundamental problem with Age of Empires is that there's so much variance. We as a community like longer series. Anything shorter than a best of 5 for a 1v1 feels kind of cheap, especially if it's a big important tournament match. I guess by that I mean a best of 3 or a best of 1 even. But still, we like relatively long series. Normal Age of Empires games can last anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour and a half or something. Now that makes planning multiple series rather difficult, where like if you have 2 semifinals and then a grand final, then it's a little bit awkward to plan because you can have things go just so many different ways. I can understand having a time limit to make sure that you don't just fall ridiculously far behind. Now, the new players getting bored by stalemates aspect of it, I think that if you're in a situation where you're not in a mirror matchup, which was not the case in this tournament because it had drafting, stalemates, like total complete stalemates, are a lot less likely. I think just in my personal experience with playing and viewing, stalemates are the most likely in mirror matches because you're both doing the same thing and the defender's advantage is just kind of a big hill to climb, sometimes literally. But I don't think that it would be a big deal here. Second problem, the actual time limit that was chosen was way too short. There were so many games. Well, I say so many, but there were like 5 or 6 games where going into the last 5 minutes or so of the game, it was very, very even. You weren't sure who was going to win, or even worse, the person who looked like they were ahead lost because of like score reasons. Like that feels cheap. That doesn't feel like this game was determinative of who is the better Age of Empires player. At least in my opinion, and I think in a lot of other people's opinion. So I think that it's actually sort of okay to have a time limit, but it needs to be a time limit that would never, like almost never actually matter. And I'm talking about like 2 hours game time. Like that within 2 hours encompasses like 98% of Age of Empires games, if not more. At least for 1v1s. Might be a little bit more likely for team games, but still very unlikely. And 2, the way that people were playing as it approached the time limit was not very fun. It was a lot of camping because you didn't want to lose your units. Like, you had people researching completely pointless techs, like getting guard tower or keep when they don't have any towers, just because getting techs inflates your score. And as opposed to promoting aggression and, trying to, like, take those big fights and, like, get advantages that way, it was just, okay, I don't want to do anything. And that resulted in a lot of campy games, which is not very fun for anybody. It's not really fun to watch, and it's really not fun or, I think, engaging for the players either. So I think those are the big takeaways with time limit. I don't like it. I can understand people who think it's necessary. but I think it would need to be changed heavily going forward. Oh yeah, also, a much more minor point, but something I forgot to write down. Auto Scout, Auto Build, Auto everything. The horses being put on Auto Scout is bad. Now, I was against Auto Scouting from the first. But the fact that there were so many times when a player would like find a sneak lumber camp or mining camp that they never would have done if they didn't have just random units, little horses patrolling constantly across the map at every point in time. It's completely brain dead and removes a layer of strategy and skill. And I don't think it helped the game in any way, like making it more, again, engaging as a player or as a viewer. So it's not going to be completely taken out of the game, but I do think that it should be removed for tournaments. And I think that there would be a lot of agreement in the general community about that. Anyway, results. I mean, normally I wouldn't even talk about this all that much, but the fact that we did have Mr. Yo not only beat Viper in the finals, but clobber Viper 4-0, I think that is, one, incredible for Yo, who I make no secrets of my fanboying and think that I knew he would be the one to, defeat Viper in a big important series, but my own ego aside, I think it's great for the game. Viper winning everything takes a lot of excitement out of, a big tournament finals, because you're just like, oh, okay, Viper's gonna win. Now, if Viper wins like 80% of tournaments, like I still think that's fine. But if there is at least the possibility in viewers' minds that Viper could very well lose a tournament, then I think that's really, really important for the health of the game going forward. This wasn't Classic Age of Empires. Mr. Yo also won Mangrove Shallows Cup, which was also sort of a tweak of the typical Age of Empires. I think that's actually more of a tweak than Empire Wars is. Not really, I would say, the best, like, true indicator of skill or whatever, but still, I think it's good that we're seeing Viper pushed here, because ideally that raises the level of competition for everybody. Oh yeah, also one other little thing I wanted to talk about before I move on is the way that the last day was done in particular, where you had first set was Yo versus Leary, semifinal 1. And that set, it went all 5 games. It was really close. It was a good set. Yo moves on to the finals. Yo is casting because he is the official Chinese streamer. Now, he is then casting Viper versus Hera. Viper does win 3-0 over Hera, but 2 of the 3 games did go to the time limit, and I can imagine that they would have been fairly exhausting games. Also, Yo gets to completely analyze and break down Viper's games, like, as they're happening, and this did actually happen. Like, this had an effect on the finals, where in game number 4, where Viper went for the same strategy with Teutons on Land Madness that he did against Hera, with great success against Hera, Yo was just able to completely counter that strategy and just punish Viper with some very fast archers and just a ton of aggression. That is not very fair to Viper. And then, of course, the fact that he had to play the finals not right after the semifinal, but fairly soon after the semifinal, where Yo, gets a break. Yes, he's still casting, but it's still more of a break. On the flip side, Yo is playing at like 3 a.m. That also isn't good. If on both sides we can do something to mitigate this, I'm personally a fan of just have the finals on its own day so both players can go into it feeling, rested and ready to go. Because we want people playing at their best. And anything that we as organizers, I say we as an organizer, I haven't organized anything yet. I've just taken part in stuff. But still, as a community, I think we should do everything we can to have the players in physical conditions where they can play at their best. Now, more positive stuff. Capture Age. Capture Age, guys, in case you did not know, is now coming to DE. with partnership with Microsoft. Now, I don't know most of the details on this, but Capture Age really makes Age of Empires a lot more presentable to people, and they're super good about taking feedback. The developers of Capture Age, and constantly working hard to improve it, and make it a better overall viewing experience. And I don't really have a whole lot to say about it other than I hope that it's at least open to me, and it's not like super exclusive, like locked behind only a few select streams, which I don't think it would be. And two, that I'm just glad it's a thing. It's good, right? And it's still something that, again, I wouldn't like really hammer in normally, other than the fact that DE spectating system is not good. It's just not good. And Capture Age is just such a big improvement. Now, I've already been rambling for 20 minutes, so I guess I just want to sort of more broadly discuss I think the big takeaways from RedBull Wololo. One, we had a big corporate sponsor for a tournament that wasn't Microsoft, and was like a mainstream, not only esports, but sports sponsor in Red Bull. I think that's good. Now, what you think of Red Bull, both as a product and as a company, that aside, the concept of us getting larger investors interested and hopefully having good results and putting on a good show, this tournament wasn't half-assed by any means. Now, you could say that the way they went about setting it up was half-assed. I don't agree with that, but I can see people in my mind making that argument. But this was their first entry into AoE, and I think that it should set a good precedent going forward and should make, ideally, more people interested in investing in AoE, and two, hopefully it makes Red Bull more interested in not only investing into another Age of Empires something event, or even like sponsoring a team or something. But hopefully they can take the opportunity to learn from both the things they did well with RedBull Wololo and the things that they need to improve on, because there is plenty of both that I think that Red Bull can take away, or like we as a community can take away. Some other things, again, we really need some sort of like main league standard setting tournament for Age of Empires, because all we're getting are just like gimmicky tournaments over and over and over and over again, and there isn't any like real consistency on settings or format. And yeah, it like, I guess, makes viewers like that much more interested, but I feel like there's a lot to be said for just like a regular old tournament. We do have Battle of Africa coming up, and that is a fairly standard tournament. Yeah, the maps are a little bit wacky, but everything else is very, very standard. So hopefully that will at least fill that void a little bit, at least as far as team games go. But as far as 1v1s go, we are pretty lacking, I think, in that respect. And I think it's something that we're really like searching to like figure out who's the best Age of Empires player. You do rankings on, okay, who's your top 10 players. It's just all over the place. Like, everyone had Viper at number 1 before today, and even after today, I think most people still have Viper number 1. I do too. But then, like, from there, it's just a hot mess. And just having that, like, big legitimizing tournament for players, I think, with, like, standard settings would be really, really good. Now, that's a big ask, right? So I can understand why it doesn't exist right now, but it's something at least I personally would prioritize if possible. And I guess also the viewer numbers were great. Yes, there was drama. There's always drama. You can never escape the drama. But again, it shows Age of Empires in an upwards trajectory, and that is something to be happy about. And I want to stress that I don't make these videos in just like the backseat organizing or complaining about stuff. I think that it is important to have these sorts of like emotional, just like earnest conversations about what we want. I think that's just good for everybody. And obviously you don't need to agree with me on everything, but I think the dialogue is important. and I think that we are making tournaments better and better going like over time. But we still need to make sure we keep those improvements consistently going forward, because there's still lots of stuff everyone can do better. But again, or I guess to close, RedBull Wololo was something that was a big surprise for me. I didn't know it was a thing until the day before it was announced, and yeah, like it brought a lot of people into the community, I think, and I hope that more people will stay around. And I guess as far as this video goes, I know I personally am, all gung-ho about AoE, and hopefully I can cast the next big event. I know I couldn't cast this one, and I was disappointed about that, but like I understand that. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this discussion. Please feel free to, put your thoughts down in the comments. I do read all of them, and I respond to most of them. So yeah, definitely, also, like the video if you enjoyed it and all that stuff. But yeah, that was RedBull Wololo, guys. Battle of Africa is coming up next, and that is going to be pretty awesome, or however Mem says it, in a much more interesting and fun way than I could ever do it. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.